Hey, listeners, we are changing it up again in our continuous pursuit of making awesome happen. We are trying something new. And one of the things that's really important in innovation is thought diversity. And we always come up with better ideas when we bring new perspectives to the table that are fresh and different from our own. It's one of the reasons that we like to facilitate cross-functional innovation workshops. So I wanted to create a space for Alissa and Jennica to dive into the human side of innovation. And Alissa is going to play host this time, and she's going to be interviewing Jennica on the human side of innovation. And I think that this is interesting because I have a technology background and an equipment finance background, but Jennica has a whole different background from mine. And so she brings such a unique lens. And when we blend our perspectives, we come up with much better solutions. And so that's what we're doing today. I'm going to turn it over to our lovely and talented host, Alissa Bartlett. On with the show.
Welcome to the TomorrowZone Catalyst Podcast. I'm your host for today, Alissa Bartlett. Everyone talks about innovation as fast, disruptive, and game-changing. But let's pause. What if we ask a better question? What happens when we try to grow innovation like a factory and not a garden? Today, we explore what it means to design innovation processes that are not only fast, but deeply human. In a time when the push for speed is louder than ever, we're slowing down just enough to ask, where does empathy fit into all of this? Today's guest is Jennica Burgh, Operations Director for TomorrowZone. Jennica is the strategic North Star behind the scenes, blending deep leadership, people-centered strategy, and a unique background in both social work and financial planning. She's the glue that holds vision and execution together. Jennica brings an empathetic lens to complex systems, making her the perfect voice to unpack what innovation looks like when we put people first. Welcome, Jennica.
Thanks. It's good to be here again.
Jennica, when you hear the phrase human-centered innovation, what does that mean to you in practice?
You know, that's such a great question. And we are at TomorrowZone, that's the core of who we are, is human-centered in our innovation. And when I hear that, it really does mean people first. You know, we talk a lot about anytime you hear the word innovation, the first thought that a lot of people have is technology. And that is such a dangerous place to go because the reality is people are the most important part. And I hate to use the word asset, but really asset of any organization. And so we have to be focusing on the people first, making sure that anything else in innovation that's done enables humans and isn't making life harder for humans, but is making life and work better for humans. And so that to me is when I hear the phrase human-centered innovation, it's people first. Always starting with people, what they need, what they don't need, and then eventually moving towards things like process and technology and different things like that. But just remembering that people are the most important.
In your role, how do you balance the demand for speed and the need for empathy in decision-making and operations?
This is an interesting question because this has been actually a real growth area for me, I'll be honest. You know, it's so funny because back in my 20s, I was a clinical social worker, you know, so you would think that empathy and humans would be my default. But if you know anything about the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 3. And Enneagram 3s are all about efficiency. You know, how quickly can we get it done? You know, all these things. And so the default with that is that sometimes when you're looking at a checklist, when you're looking at optimizing processes, you can lose people in that. And so I've really had to train myself, and, you know, my 20s was quite a while ago, to, again, be intentional about putting people first. And, you know, I remember years ago, I could be the person that if I had a task that I was doing, if I had something, a place that I needed to be, Alissa, I could pass you in the hallway. And in my head, I'd be like, oh, there's Alissa. But I would never say, hey, Alissa, how you doing? I would just keep walking. And then, of course, to you, you're like, oh my gosh, did I do something? Is she angry at me? Did I mess? Like all just the way that our head naturally goes. And so just recognizing those things about myself and being intentional about stopping. And even like I had to go back to people and be like, oh my gosh, I realized I passed you and didn't say hi. I am so sorry. This is what was going on. But so part of it, if anybody listening to this is like, this is my default. I'm just all about speed and efficiency. First of all, just recognize that in yourself and be honest about it. And then it's really about looking for ways to kind of make that flip and make sure that we are, as leaders, really putting our people first and letting them know that they are important. And so that was kind of a long way to get to this. So the first thing for me is just self-awareness. Like if I do find myself getting into that place, recognizing it and kind of pausing, apologizing if I need to, and being intentional going forward. But it's also just about like one of the last conversations a couple of weeks ago that we had was about virtual meetings. TomorrowZone, everything we do is virtually. And that makes it very easy to be jumping from meeting to meeting. And so being intentional about taking just a couple minutes or just really a couple seconds, even at the beginning of a meeting, and just going, hey, how's everybody doing? Do we need a couple seconds to finish up where we're at? Do we need to take a couple deep breaths to get ourselves in this, present? And just, it's even little things like that of creating just micro moments at the beginning of meetings or the beginning of any interaction, just to connect on a human level instead of just jumping into the agenda. If I haven't talked to a team member for a while, when we're jumping on a meeting, I always try to just go, how you doing? Anything new? And just try that connection and then move into business. And so I think, and that's such a simple thing, right? Like somebody hearing this probably goes, well, duh. But yet when we're on autopilot and we've got a million things to do, it can be really hard to stop and just recognize our team members as humans and allow that, that space and that connection. And so that's just a little thing that I try to do, but also just being aware of what's going on in people's lives. Just because the reality is, there is no more separation of personal and business. There's boundaries, right? But our lives, especially with mobile technology and all of that, it's like we can always be found. Our kids can find us at work can find us at home. It's just how that works. And so it's recognizing that and then just being aware of what's going on. And if somebody's got a whole lot that they have going on, allowing, hey, let me know what you need help with. Let me know if you need someone else on the team to take this for you. Because then when you give people that space, then they're willing to do that for another team member. I think that's a culture we've really been intentional about building at TomorrowZone. There's something going on. We always say, nobody's an island at TomorrowZone. We're a team. And so that means if you're struggling with something, lean on other team members. And when you work together that way, then that builds empathy, but it also builds a culture of trust and a culture of just letting people be humans and recognizing that that's our reality.
Yeah, I'm hearing that, doing that intentional check-in and putting that first above the efficiency of the meeting.
Yeah. And I have to do a call out. That's a practice that we learned from our partners at the Human Leadership Institute and, have really been intentional about incorporating that in TomorrowZone. And I think it's made a huge difference in just those, even our day-to-day meetings.
Mm-hmm. So what are some signals that leaders should look out for that indicate that their innovation process might be missing the human element?
The first thing is if you find yourself immediately going to technology, if your default is technology, then you're not looking at humans first. So, again, it's that just taking a moment and doing some self-reflection. What's my first go-to? So that's the first one. But also it's just noticing if you're starting to get a lack of engagement from your humans, your people, your team members. If you're not having adoption, we talk about this all the time at TomorrowZone, that, the worst thing you can do is invest a ton of money in technology and not take the time to think about and plan and implementation and adoption. Even if you're in a meeting and you're just noticing that you've got a team member who's going, yeah, or yeah, that's fine, whatever. Those are, stop and check in, or what's going on? Are you, and not in a condemning way. Like, are you okay? Do you have any concerns? Is there anything I should know about? It's kind of combination of noticing as a leader yourself what you're going to, but also, again, taking the time to connect with your team members, and just see how they're responding to things. And sometimes this could even be, because I recognize that there's different levels, especially depending on how large an organization. So sometimes it's even maybe talking to your middle management and just going, how are you doing? How is the rest of the team doing? And just even asking those questions to just see how people are doing. But if there's a lack of engagement, or if there's, even, a little bit of passive aggressive where people are just agreeing and then not doing what the agreement is, then you're missing the human side. And so it's really important to stop and check in and have a conversation.
So speaking of those check-ins and conversations, how can teams build rhythms or rituals that center humanity in their innovation workflows?
I think, one that I mentioned is at the beginning of meetings, just doing a check-in. The other thing is celebrating wins, small wins. I mean, if you can have a ritual practice of every time there's a stand-up, or every time you're talking about rolling something out, anytime you have an opportunity to come together, really just starting with a quick, hey, let's share a couple quick wins. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be something very small. And that doesn't just have to be face-to-face meetings. It can even be, if there's a weekly or a monthly announcement, newsletter or email or something that leaders are sending out, start by highlighting some wins and highlighting people that are doing a really good job, to just go, hey, I just want to do a shout out to Alissa, who really stepped up in this area. Those do a lot to bring that team culture and to let your team see that you notice them. You notice the work that's being done. You notice what the efforts they're making. That just does a ton to build that culture and to let people be seen. Because so often you always want your people to know that you see them and you appreciate them and you care about them. Because then there's loyalty that's built, and not to be manipulative, but to be very genuine in that. Like, hey, I notice you, and I just want you to know that I appreciate what you're doing. But just being intentional about sharing wins, having those check-ins, different things like that. And on our team agenda, it's an agenda item. And it's an agenda item so that I don't forget and I don't run into the efficiency of all the updates. So do something to remind yourself as a leader to be a human. And that's where technology can actually be super helpful. And we don't joke about it. We're serious about it at TomorrowZone, that a lot of times the technology we use can actually help us to engage as humans, setting reminders. You just had a birthday, happy birthday. We have a reminder. I have a reminder on the calendar so that I know when team members' birthdays are. It's just little things like that, using technology to remind you of the things that are important to you to do as a leader, because then you can go about doing business and doing life and doing your job, and technology is there to help you remind those things and to do shout outs to the people that are important.
And we do that, and I can say as a member of the TomorrowZone team that's definitely been a game changer in terms of the culture.
Yeah.
So what tensions have you personally navigated between being efficient and being human, and how do you handle them?
This is a really important question. And I just want to say that the reality is sometimes there are just things that need to get done. And that is the bottom line. And it always comes down to, I always think about what constitutes a pattern, because sometimes people talk about, I was just this one time that I needed to do whatever. I needed to work on the weekend, or I needed to, work late, whatever that looks like. And so Well, if it's every week, it's not a one-off. It's a pattern. If it's every month, that even could be called a pattern. Quarterly, a couple times a year, that's a one-off. So just recognizing that there are those times when everybody just has to put their head down and move forward and get the job done. That's the reality of life. In business, it can also be the reality personally, but, we're talking business here. So, sometimes it is just and it's just, again, we talk a lot about, and I talk a lot about making the implicit explicit. One of the most dangerous things you can do, and one of the least empathetic things you can do, is assume everybody knows what you're thinking. And for those of us that are efficiency based, it can be super easy and just our default to just move forward and assume everybody else is coming along with us. And so just actually saying the thing, hey, I realize that this is tough right now and we need to just move through this. And I'm asking you to come along with me. So just being honest about it and bringing everybody on the same page, I think is super helpful. But also just recognizing, how often am I asking this of the team? How often am I asking this of myself? Is it, and logging? I mean, actually, if you feel that you're falling into that, I'm more focused on just get the job done than working with the people on my team. Actually taking some time to log what you're doing in a day and what your day looks like can just kind of, again, it makes the implicit explicit. You're actually looking at your day. But it's really just, again, kind of stepping back. And the other thing that I do is I try to build margin. I mean, I do time blocking in my calendar. And I highly recommend that, because the benefit of time blocking is, for example, preparing for this podcast. I put a block on my calendar so that I could make sure that I was focusing on doing that. That's an efficiency task, but it also is a humanity task, because then it's not something that's spinning in my head all the time. I have a plan on how to do that. And so helping people, to do that. But it's a constant tension. We talk a lot about work-life balance. That's a very common topic these days. And it's really, I feel like the word balance is a misnomer, because it's really work-life balancing. And I feel like that tension between efficiency and empathy is the same thing. It's a balancing. And what I mean by that is, if you picture a gymnast who's on a balance beam, for example, if you look at their toes, they're constantly shifting to maintain balance. And so it's a constant, you don't just stand there and you're balanced. It's a balancing. And so I think that just recognizing that is the case. And sometimes there are the times when you have the space to really stop and dig in, human to human. And sometimes you just got to put your head down and get the job done. And that's just the reality of life.
I love that gymnast analogy.
In honor of Deb, right?
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone who wants to champion more empathy in their organization but feels resistance?
First of all, that can be very challenging. And I want to acknowledge, I can be empathetic in recognizing that that's hard when you see that need and yet leadership doesn't seem to see the same need. But you don't need your leadership to okay you being empathetic. I mean, a lot of the things that we just talked about are very easy to do one-on-one. If you're in a meeting with someone, just taking a few seconds at the beginning to go, how you doing? Do you need to finish anything up before we dive in? Do you need to take a couple deep breaths? Those are very simple things that one person can do in a meeting. And also just noticing people. I mean, if somebody on your team does something that you think they need a shout out, do that. Hey, I just want to acknowledge this person for what they did. Like a lot of the things that we've talked about, anybody on a team can do that. It's nice when it comes from leadership, but it does not have to come from leadership in order to be effective. And so just recognize that, and you can build that culture on your team, and then you become the person that people recognize cares and you're available. And so that can be super powerful.
So tell me, Jennica, what's one myth about innovation and empathy that you think needs to go?
I'm going to give two, because I think the first one is how I started, and that is that innovation is about technology. That is a huge myth that's out there. TomorrowZone is doing everything we can to bust that myth. because true innovation starts with humans. But the other one is that people hear empathy and they think that's like a soft woo-woo type thing. But it's not. It actually, when empathy is built in a team, when humans know that they are seen and appreciated, that is energizing. And that actually, it releases areas that they can then move into innovation and move into creativity, because the reality is that innovation has a risk factor to it. And when there's a culture where people aren't appreciated and people aren't recognized, it's a danger culture. And then they're not willing and able to take risk or to even think about it, which is what's required in creativity. They're just head down, get it done so that I don't get in trouble. And that is not a culture that will build innovation. You cannot build innovation in that culture. And so when you have empathy and when your people know that they're important and their psychological safety, well, you're unlocking creativity and you're unlocking the opportunity for innovation. And so if you want an innovative culture, human-centered focus is vital. It is not going to happen otherwise.
Thank you for dropping some truth bombs on us.
Yeah, I'm a little passionate about it.
So for those of you listening out there, if you're leading innovation, pause and ask yourself, where is empathy showing up in our process? And where is it missing? Better yet, bring this question to your team. Start a conversation about what human-centered really looks like in your context. The future of innovation isn't just fast, it's deeply human. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay curious and choose to make awesome happen.